Day 1270 of the war. Many people write that the Putin-Trump summit in Alaska is over with nothing. I wouldn't say that, but it all depends on your expectations. For me, the indicative cancellation of the joint lunch and the second part of the negotiations. In other words, despite the gentle welcome, the American program has changed and not in the direction Russia would like. There was no normal press conference either. Putin and Trump went to the journalists, said a couple of words, but there were no question sessions. At the same time, the face of Trump did not express any joy. Did the American president understand that he was wasted time? Question without answer. But the words, especially the words of Trump, are less important to me than the actions. And the actions of us are to reduce the program of negotiations by at least 2, and clearly not to the desire of Russia. The elimination of the Russian breakthrough under Pokrovsky continues, at the beginning of which I told you about in the days, but now more reliable confirmations have appeared. Ukrainian fighters cleared a number of settlements where the Russians infiltrated and masked the map of Kishka. Russian losses in this area exceeded 300 people, which on the one hand means that it is not about a couple of savageers, but about quite serious forces, and on the other hand, it buries Putin's plans for a mild, significant victory against the background of negotiations. We are not talking about any collapse of the front, nor about a serious and significant breakthrough in the Russian armed forces. Ukrainian drones have watered down the Sukhograz on the Caspian Sea. It carried out transport of ammunition and supplies for shads from Iran. Moreover, control point for the 132nd Motorized Rifle Brigade has been destroyed on the occupied territory, the one whose soldiers are now eliminating between Pokrovsk and Dobropillia. A powerful explosion rumbled on the gunpowder plant in the Ryazan region. The building of the gunpowder workshop is completely destroyed. 13 people died, more than 130 were injured. Apparently, the explosion has nothing to do with the military or sabotage activity of Ukraine. A war of technology continues on the front. Ukrainians stretch front roads with nets from drones, and Russians master drones with artificial intelligence and alternatives, Starlink. At the same time, the Russian army is mostly doing things the old-fashioned way, working on the front, covering the wounded who haven't been treated, working on the front, covering the wounded who haven't been treated half-willed, summing up with tape to the tree, working on contracts for the sick and criminals waiting for punishment for theft and murders. All this and more in today's Fresh Report, which you can support with your like, comment, and subscription to the channel. All these actions help promote the video, especially since your subscriptions are important for YouTube algorithms. Summit Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump did not bring reliable news about a possible collapse of the war in Ukraine. The statements of the two presidents, according to the results of an almost 2-hour conversation, are counted from the agency's publication. After saying that there is no deal, Trump clarified that he has achieved significant progress, not clarifying what he means. The Kremlin also did not achieve what was desired. Without a deal, Washington refused to discuss the economy. The negotiations began according to the schedule, about 11:3 p.m. local time, 10:3 p.m. Kiev time. The moment started with the fact that two leaders met on the Red Road, going at the same time from their planes. At the same time, Trump applauded when Putin went to his meeting and then shook hands with the Russian leader. The pride of the moment was given by the group of fighters and the bombers who flew over their heads at the meeting. Although some treat it as their own and say that it was a hidden threat, but leaving aside those who like the idea more, let's just focus on the treatment of what's happening, who has which pants, what rag, and so on. After that, Trump invited the Russian president to his limousine, on which they together went to negotiations. The negotiations went 3-on-3. The Russian side was joined by President Yuri Ushakov and Foreign Ministry head Sergei Lavrov, the U.S. head of the Marco Rubio State Department, and special representatives of the Witkov. But then things didn't go as planned. The first alarming bell rang when journalists began meeting at a press conference after the 3-on-3 meeting. It prolonged from 2 to 4 hours and 45 minutes. At first, it was planned to continue at lunchtime, but then the talks would continue in the broader format, while the summit itself would extend for at least 6 to 7 hours. On the Russian side, Ministry of Finance Anton Seluanov, Minister of Defense Andriy Belousov, and President Kirill Dmitriev were to participate. On the American side, Minister of Trade Robert Lutnick, Minister of Finance Scott Bessant, and CIA Director John Ratcliffe, Defense Minister Pete Hegseth. That wide representation was needed to discuss matters of cooperation in the economic sector and matters of control over arms, which Kremlin announced before the summit. As soon as the meeting was underway, it turned out that Putin had signed a deal allowing foreign investors, including the host American oil company ExxonMobil, to return parts of the oil gas project, Sakhalin-1. However, in the end, the specific conversation at the press conference was only about Ukraine, and the meeting in the expanded format was cancelled. We could not find a complete understanding, unfortunately, until there is no deal, Trump said at the end of the conversation. However, a little later, he clarified that the progress was still achieved. Today, we have achieved a significant progress, said the American president, not clarifying what he means. The American president clarified that he will inform the results of the representatives of NATO and the European Union and Vladimir Zelensky. and the words of Putin during the press conference are that he refused to go to any compromise on Ukraine. President of Russia stated the need to eliminate all root causes of the crisis before resolving the conflict, which he has won, and the bullet in his head at this summit would solve all the problems and all the root causes of the crisis. Other details of the negotiations on Ukraine are not published. About 16 hours later, Trump and Putin flew away, having spent much less time with each other than expected. The conversation of Putin and Trump was very positive, said Kremlin's press secretary, Dmitry Peskov. Putin and Trump made an exhausting statement after the negotiations, so from the questions of journalists at the final press conference, it was decided to refuse, he added. But this sounds, of course, like nonsense, since if everything is so positive, then why half of the planned negotiations have just been cancelled, and two in-love sociopaths have not come to terms with the victory over the improvised meeting, as planned before. Moreover, if we take the formal side of the question, then in fact, from the point of view of the rule, about what happened after the meeting of Trump with Zelensky in the White House, when the lunch was cancelled, and the further press approach, the same was here. After the meeting with Putin, the President of the United States gave an interview in Fox News. In it, he evaluated the negotiations on a dozen because it is good when large nuclear powers are talking, he explained his assessment. Trump announced the results of the meeting that Putin wants to solve the problem and Russia and Ukraine are close to the deal. What parameters of this deal and on what Putin is agree, Trump did not say. He did not say even on what question he does not agree with the Russian president. Trump stated that he would not answer this question. Nevertheless, he stated that now it is about President Zelensky. The American president is ready to hold a meeting of Putin and Zelensky already in the next week. Now they are going to organize a meeting of President Zelensky with President Putin. And I think I didn't even ask them about it. Not that I want to be there, but I want to make sure that this will be done, Trump said. From these words, it is not clear who is still organizing the meeting, Moscow or Kiev, and in general, are there any talks about this? Because the same Ushakov, for example, already commented later that nothing like this was discussed. Trump also said that he and Putin have largely agreed on the issue of guarantees of security of Ukraine. He also said that he advises Zelensky to agree on a deal with Putin. Russia is a very powerful power and Ukraine is not. It is not clear, really, on what deal it is necessary to agree if there is no deal. Responding to the question of secondary sanctions against China for the purchase of Russian oil, Trump said, "Because of what happened today, I think we do not need to think about this yet. But he would allow it that in 2 or 3 weeks it will be possible to think about this again," said the American Aristovic. This is the main result of the summit. Putin managed to win at least 2 or 3 more weeks, and knowing Trump is most likely even more, because then he will call another meeting productive and then another, and so on. On the other hand, it can be noted that the significantly worse scenario, in which Putin would convince Trump to a deal that is unfavorable for Ukraine, but which he would now pressure Zelensky to accept, also did not come true. But still, the only one who can sincerely rejoice in this situation is the personnel of Trump's administration, who apparently got the second free lunch this year. Let me remind you, they first ate when Zelensky quickly left the White House after the fight with Trump and Vance. Let's take a short break from our opinion for now then, of course. In the evening we will talk in more detail. Trump did not see what he expected at all, no progressions, no concessions, no compromises, nothing that could be predicted as at least some kind of success. Even though earlier, remember, there was a piece of air, a ceasefire, well, at least something. At least something to predict, so to speak, as the success of this meeting, then why it was done. That is, there is no answer to this question now, just not. At the same time, he of course cannot go out and say, "Guys, it was all beep, we are separating," and estimates everything by 10 points and says what a cool conversation. But the fact remains a fact. The result of such a high-profile meeting was a great asterisk, clearly not what Trump was looking forward to. At the same time, international media will stroke him for several more days over what he ultimately looked like in the background of Vladimir Putin, who just wanted to take a photo with the President of the United States and avoid sanctions, and for this reason put on triple vestments. The real growth of Vladimir Putin is 160 centimeters, according to the conditional Wikipedia 170 centimeters. The growth of Trump is 190. But in the photos you can note that they do not see the difference even in 20 centimeters, which should be if we take the officially declared growth, especially in 30 centimeters. If we take the real growth of Putin, I somehow wrote about this, but not the investigation, less investigation. I took the training of Putin and Medvedev, where there is definitely no platform for feet, and just counted how high each of them was, because officially Medvedev is below Putin. But in that training, it is just visible that this is not true. In any case, Vladimir Putin wanted to take a photo, he took a photo, he wanted to avoid sanctions, he avoided sanctions. But there is a complete victory of Putin, but not over Ukraine. For her, nothing has changed at all, but over Trump, and in the same spirit as before. Remember, Trump complained that we speak well, but nothing is happening, and was very unsatisfactory about it. The same thing happened, and I'm sure world media, the headlines of which he read so often and on which they are angry, will tell him about it quite directly. So, despite the situational and predictable victory of Putin, I would not hurry with deep conclusion yet. Putin again latched on to Trump with his face to the toilet, not giving him anything. And it will be obvious to the American president very soon. What will happen next, I don't judge. But I will just repeat my thought that everything went much better than, for example, I expected. It is obvious from the action of the American delegation that it is not in surprise of what happened. But words, these are still words. The actions are more important. I think that in these 3.5 years, everyone could already be convinced of this many times. At the end, I will only say that you do not need to hope for any Trump. Trump is not an ally of Ukraine. Trump does not like Vladimir Zelensky. Trump very much likes Vladimir Putin, and so on. Yes, he has situational gap when he sees what is happening in reality, not what he is told. At the same time, it is quite pointless to hope that a magician will suddenly come in the blue cruiser #1 and the war will end. There is a front and there is a rear. This is what Ukraine and the European Union and other countries of Europe should focus on, for which Russia is a direct threat and is right now doing aggressive actions, cyber attacks, diversions in relation to these countries. What is Trump doing there? What does he think? What does he say? This is the matter of the 10th. It is important to control it so that it remains within the contracts that are already concluded. For example, there is a sale of weapons for European money to Ukraine. The rest of the matter is the 10th. It is important to focus on the war, not on what Trump is saying and doing. Also, I do not agree with those who say that Putin's big victory is the meeting itself, that he is out of international isolation, and so on. Putin has long left international isolation. We have already managed to convince ourselves that in this world, globally, many actors are pretty much into justice, into victimization, into aggression, and so on. Everyone acts from their own interests, so Putin has dealt with a large number of different world leaders. Yes, it is clear that he is in relative isolation from the European side, but sometimes they call him. Therefore, to say that the isolation of Putin has broken down, there was no isolation of Putin, at least for the last 2 years for sure, so it seems to me to say just nothing here. The General Staff of Ukrainian Armed Forces in the meantime reported on the strike on the naval port of Alya in the Astrakhan region. In advance, the boat Port Alya 4, used for transporting artillery and missile systems from Iran, was hit. In the morning report of the Russian Ministry of Defense, it was only about the drones shot down on the territory of the neighboring Kalmykia. Later, the governor of the region, Igor Babushkin, confirmed the strike on the port, as well as information about the damage of the boat by the debris of the shot-down UAV. In the social networks, a photo of a ship appeared that clearly does not feel very good, and the Ukrainian mass project, Cyberborshnya, analyzing the photo of the dry cargo port Ol-4, confirmed that it is he who drowns in the photo. The author announced that the crew was saved. He also confirms that the ship was drowned by a drone. The operator of the port Ol-4 is under the sanctions of the Russian company MG Float, previously Transmor Float. According to the information of Gore, it is connected with the Astrakhan businessman Jamaldin Pashev. Pashev and his company are involved in the supply of UAVs to Alabuga, one of the key enterprises to collect UAVs in support of Iran, for the needs of the Russian Ministry of Defense, the department says. The port Ol-4 regularly walks on the Caspian Sea, carrying goods between Iran and Russia. As you can see, for such goods and for such advances, a new threat appeared. Ukrainian General Staff, reporting on the strike on the Ukrainian Armed Forces in Sizrania, which I told you about yesterday, also mentioned the strike at the control point of the 132nd Separate Rifle Brigade of Russian Armed Forces, the former 3rd MSBR of the People's Militia of the DPR in the occupied Nacke. By the way, the strike is interesting because the fighters of this brigade struck during the days through the Ukrainian defense under Dobropillia. It is also noticeable that several hours before the General Staff, they reported about this very strike from the Sintra and from the Cyberborshnya. As a result of the attack on Kiev, the buildings of school number 28 were hit, the analysts wrote. The analysis of the materials available in the media shows that there were several strikes in different places. We clarify the details. According to our information, since 2015, 132 separate artillery brigades were disbanded in this building, until the 23rd year of the 3rd SBR Berkut. The strike to the command point of the brigade looks especially remarkable in the background of events under Pokrovsky, which I will tell you a little later. Before we move on, I would like to remind you that you can support this channel also financially. You can do this on Patreon, the link to which is in the description, and by buying NVPN. This is a tool to bypass blockages that allow you to bypass blockages, watch YouTube at normal speed, use Twitter, use Instagram, go to blocked media, call on Telegram and WhatsApp, which is now blocked by Roskomnadzor. In general, it was used normally by the internet. Now it's, well, I don't know, it seems to me now, in principle, it is necessary to have any VPN in Russia, but if you want a high-quality one that can handle the attacks of Roskomnadzor. Roskomnadzor attacked us, in my opinion, already 3 times directly, but we managed to do this every time. Then NVPN for your service, buy by the link in the description, thereby supporting the release of the video on this channel. Well as in Russia, this is a legal VPN. It can still be purchased and can still be used. Will it change in the near future? Most likely, yes. But but when and if it happens, we will definitely let you know. Explosion occurred at the gunpowder plant Elastic in the Ryazan region, reported RIA Novosti with a link to the emergency services. Not long before the explosion, a fire occurred at the plant. No less than 13 people died and about 130 were injured. According to different reports, from 5 to 10 injured people are in serious condition. What happened is presumably not related to the drone attack, the base wrote. Later, frames appeared of the consequences of the explosion, where it was seen that nothing left from the plant, or at least from the workshop where the incident took place. In general, there is nothing surprising in such incidents. For example, only in the UK during the First World War, as a result of explosions at factories for the production of gunpowder and explosive substances, 600 people died, including women workers and local residents. So try to avoid living close to chemical and weapons factories, because if a Ukrainian drone violates security equipment, including in connection with the emergency, it can cause an incident fatal not only for the workers of the enterprise. Well, don't work at such enterprises. The negotiations on Alaska have not become a reason to stop Russian terror. About the strikes on the central market in Sumy, as well as about the attacks on Donetsk and Kherson, Zaporizhia region, reported Vladimir Zelensky in the Telegram channel. War continues. It continues because there is not only an order, but also signals for the preparation of Moscow to end this war, Zelensky wrote. As a result of the strike on Dnipro, a man died, 2 more people were injured, reported the head of the regional military administration, Sergei Lysak. In Sumy, after the Russian attack, the damaged people received 20 pallets on the central market, said the head of management of municipal security, Vitaly Denichenko. Russian Ministry of Defense rejects the strike on the market in Sumy. In the Russian military department reported about the attack, called provocations for the breakup of the Russian and U.S. summits. Remember the other day, the Ukrainian General Staff announced that the villages of Novokonstantinovka and Stepno were clean at the border with the Kursk region. And some of these channels remembered that neither from the Russian nor from the Ukrainian side reported about the occupation of these villages by the Russians. So, in the 225th Separate Assault Regiment of Ukrainian Armed Forces, which we have repeatedly helped and will help again, it showed a video of cleaning these settlements. As I expected, it was the cleaning that took place, not the liberation. The regiment forces destroyed separate Russian groups trying to enter the villages and secure there, but they did not manage to do so. While these settlements have not yet been colored in by anyone, even the most reckless cartographers, who, due to the presence of one Russian soldier, make a conclusion about the advance by 5 kilometers. This, by the way, is not even about the treatment. Such a situation had a place in Sobolkin near Kupinsk. Ukrainian military analyst Konstantin Mashevitz gave a detailed picture on the morning of Friday about the Russian successes under Dobropillia and my Ukrainian reaction to them. Most of the information that Mashevitz provides quickly got old, and you will understand why soon. But I still believe it is necessary to give an analysis here so that it is clear how the events were developing. The inspector said that the Russian group in the Pokrovsk direction most likely includes up to 110,000 people. The personnel of several hundred tanks, 455 20 BBMs, no less than 500-600 artillery weapons, including mortars, 200-300 RZOs. Aviation support is provided up to 6 front bombers, carriers of FAPSU, MPT, and up to 8 assault aircraft, Su-25. According to Mashevitz, at the time of his publication, the group carried out ferocious counterattacks in the area of Mayak, Pankovka, and Vladimirovka, as well as tried to hold Dorozhnya and Nikhnorovka from a counterattack of the Ukrainian defense forces, from which the fate of the Russian units, which broke through to the north, depended. Also, Russian armed forces attacked in the direction of Nablitskaya, carried out battles in Radinskoye and Krasny Limania, and tried to secure themselves on the road to Pokrovsk-Dobropillia. According to investigative information, several days ago, Russian infantry groups passed through Lakhany in the defense of the Ukrainian Defense Force and advanced 15.5 kilometers, not meeting any special resistance. They took Kucherovyar and Zolotoy Kolodets in separate groups and went to the road to Dobropillia-Kramatorsk. According to the Mashevitz, the total number of these groups did not exceed 300-350 people, and their success was given to the Russian command, which for 3 days could not significantly expand the breakthrough to the village of Horlovina, nor direct reinforcements to the reached border. Mashevitz explains that the command of the 51st Combined Arms Army, which was active in this direction, gave more attention to the battles in the area of Belitsky and Radinsky than suddenly achieved this success. On the night of August 12-13, the Ukrainian forces began counterattacks on Nikhnorovka and the concentration around the zone of the Russian breakthrough. According to Mashevitz, the Ukrainian command tried to cut the encirclement of Russian armed forces at the base, but the Russian tried to not allow this and expand the flank of the breakthrough. Along with this, the Russian military reinforced attacks on other directions to dig Ukrainian reserves. In particular, they managed to advance successfully southwest of Pokrovsk, Mashevitz reported. The inspector believed that the Russian command will hardly retreat from the initial plan of battles for Pokrovsk, which, in his opinion, is a cut of the logistical routes on Dobropillia with the next assault on the city from the south. He did not rule out that one of the Russian commanders would take risk for offensive actions on Dobropillia or Kramatorsk. However, he considered this plan hopeless, as the Ukrainian defense forces had already redeployed reserves. According to the deep state map, Ukrainian forces successfully counterattacked in the area of the so-called Russian breakthrough under Dobropillia. They managed to separate the Russian infantry groups from the enemy and establish control over several, although not over all, settlements. As you remember, in the days I told about this, but it was covered that there was no reliable data on which I could rely, but now they have appeared. Turning to the analysis of Mushevitz, I note that the Ukrainian defense forces could almost completely hit Nikhonorovka, a significant judge in the throat of the breakthrough, as well as restore confident control over the areas of Pokrovsk-Dobropillia highway between Rodinsk and Blitskoy. That is, to break through or, at least, to delay the implementation of Russia's plan for fighting in Pokrovsk, which Mushevitz considers the main one. Well, I will also note that probably as a result of the strike at the control point of the 132nd MSBR in the occupied Yannakiev, the Russians have possibly lost control of the leaked groups if it was even there. Here, as how these events were described by analysts. The defense forces, after several difficult days of work, have stabilized the situation in some way in the settlement of Vesely Zalot Kolodezh, Kucherov Yar, which we recently wrote. This has already been reflected on our map after the update, as well as in the statement of the 1st NGU Corps as of. Next, Deep State quotes this very statement. For the last 3 days, the forces and means of the 1st NGU Corps Azov, together with the neighboring subordinated units, have managed to stop the advance of Russian armed forces. In the course of the search and strike actions, the following settlements were cleared: Grusko, Rubishnaya, Novovdino, Petrovka, Vesely, Zalody, Kalady appeared in the Corps. Immediately after the public conversation, continuing Deep State already from itself, all the necessary energy and attention, including the recently entered parts of the 1st Corps, were sent to this front line. At the same time, additional resources from the German armed forces were pulled up. The 79th and 82nd Brigades for the stabilization of the situation, as well as other units are connected: the 1st and 425th Separate Assault Regiment, the 25th Separate Assault Battalion, the 2nd Battalion, the 92nd Separate Assault Brigade, the 32nd MBR, the 93rd MBR, the 38th Separate Brigade of Marine Infantry, and the 14th Brigade of Operational Appointment of Madhyar, and the National Police of Ukraine. Ukrainian fighters began working, cleaning, and blocking occupiers on the occupied area. Russian forces found a weak place in the defense, then immediately took the chance to start infantry. Unfortunately, the Russians continued the chaotic advance deep, bypassing even command and defensive positions and a number of recently created engineering and fortification structures. They didn't have time, as it should be, to secure themselves to attract the main forces, in particular, the drone units. Before the Russian advance, there was no active support from the air defense, artillery, and other means. All this time, the fighters of the defense forces tried to hold the Russians back, but due to the destabilization of the situation and the lack of a full picture of what was happening, it was extremely difficult. It is important to pay attention to the results of the statement of the 1st Corps. The enemy's unauthorized losses are 271, the sanitary losses are 101, the prisoners are 13. These are not 5 or 10 mythical saboteurs trying to get deep, as separate official speakers from the Ukrainian side add from themselves. But a serious problem which was possible to determine and stabilize on time by showing Russia what a coordinated and strong Ukrainian army is, analyses continue. I want to see more such reactions to the crisis and as little reason for their appearance as possible. We hope that those who twisted or recklessly accepted the situation will take responsibility, and after-action review, which will bring positive results in the future, will take its place. Unfortunately, it is too early to say about full success. The situation remains difficult, since the Russians are already pulling additional forces into the area, including Russian units are once again actively working on logistics in the depths, which indicates about the failure of their initial actions. Defense fighters continue to clean and block Russian forces, making great effort to put an end to all their attempts. The work continues. Hold your hand on the pulse and react to every change, Deep State assures. I will join in the hope that all this Russian manifestation in the Ukrainian army will end. Lies, hope for what it will bring, it's all like this. Listen. It's time to end with this, right? And this is the old way of the Donetsk region. Well, that is, it is the Ukrainian defense force of the Donetsk region that came. When Drobets for a while managed to avoid this beep, but unfortunately, you see, Drobets are no longer working in this way, and this F***CKS**T began again. Well, that is, it must be survived. It is, well, not for nothing that every Ukrainian analyst and every public, I don't know, volunteer like Sergei Cernenko, repeat the 100 lies that will destroy us all. The truth is, it should not be so. The great Soviet army should not fight against the small Soviet army. We know, we have seen, we understand how it works. Well, that is, this beep needs to end. If someone is watching from Ukrainian troops to their commanders or to their subordinates and so on, and it needs to end, it can lead to something very, well here, well it carried out as it's called. It was possible to buy it on time. Again, it carried out the wrong word. There was a normal reaction, a timely reaction, an adequate reaction to what was happening. Well, the next time it cannot be carried out if the Russian troops are a little with brains, if these brains appear. Therefore, well, it's time to end this beep once and for all, really. The 93rd Separate Mechanized Brigade, which we have also helped many times, took active part in the counterattack. The 93rd Brigade Cold Yar cleared and took control of the village of Grusko and Vesely near Dobropillia, where the recent breakthrough of the Russians took place. They wrote in the channel of the unit, again, thank them for the courage, and adequate actions. Rotorized intelligence of cold-hearted people, unmanned systems of various types, and artillery were used to knock out settlements. In addition, strike ground and robotic systems were used to free Ukrainian territories. Robots armed with machine guns fired at the enemy settlements, coming close to each other. As a result of the assault actions, the wars of the 93rd Brigade eliminated and captured a significant number of Russian servicemen, the brigade reported. Good news from the Pokrovsk direction does not end there. Pokrovsk is cleared of Russian sabotage and reconnaissance groups that began to penetrate there on July 1819, said in the recently deployed 7th Corps of Air Assault Corps of Ukraine on this sector. In the social network, Korpaz published a video, accompanied by its next comment. Paratroopers of the 25th Separate Parachuted Airborne Brigade of the 7th Corps of Air Assault Corps showed what Pokrovsk looks like today. With the help of the 7th Corps of Air Assault Corps and adjacent units, the city is cleared of enemy groups and alone Russian soldiers. Ukrainian military people are working in the city, local residents are moving. However, the movement through the city itself is significantly limited, but it is possible to get to Pokrovsk, the Ukrainian paratroopers confirmed. According to the results of the last days, it can be said that the fate of Pokrovsk Minaret has not yet been decided. Putin has not yet received media victory, so it is necessary for him in the negotiations. However, the situation in the direction still remains heavy. Under the control of the Ukrainian Defense Force, there are not so many logistical routes to Pokrovsk, through which the Russian UAVs, Russian attacks and strikes of Khabov remain the most intensive on the entire front. So the situation in general is far from complete stabilization. In addition, in the Pokrovsk direction, the Ukrainian sniper has updated the world record, says Ukrainian journalist Yuri Budusov. Here's what he writes. Incredible accuracy and update of the world record in the range of fire. The Ukrainian sniper eliminated 2 Russian soldiers with a distance of 4,000 meters. The field passed into the window behind which the occupiers were. The record hit was made on August 14, 2025, using artificial intelligence to adjust the UAV system from a 14.5 mm caliber rifle Alligator. The frames are exclusive, the place, direction of the defense of the city of Gorodov-Pokrovsk-Myrnograd, zone of responsibility of the operational tactical group Donetsk, where in particular the flying units of snipers Jump Prizrak perform special tasks. Number of 8 flying units of snipers is part of the unit of Frisk troops, impressive effectiveness. In the year of the combat tasks in the defense of this direction has already been destroyed by almost 1,000 of the servicemen of Russian armed forces. It is characteristic that the previous world record also belonged to the Ukrainians. In November 2023, a Ukrainian sniper with the SBU unit, the 58-year-old Vyacheslav Kovalsky, on Kherson region eliminated the occupant on a distance of 3,800 meters. The shot then was made from the multi-caliber Ukrainian production sniper rifle, Ryazan's Lord, clarifies Budusov. In Ukraine, they took it seriously for installation of anti-drone protection in the form of tunnels from the nets on the front roads. Moreover, this follows not from any report on the next meeting of Sieski, but from the words of the military corps of Renovosti, Sergei Shilova. Here is what he writes. A bright example of what drones are good for in the modern war is the road to Unikovka-Sudza. According to the results of the Kursk operation, there are hundreds of burned equipment left in the Ukrainian armed forces. Our drone operators built a real hell on the highway and made the supply of the enemy group impossible. Zetnik brags. Have the enemy made conclusions about the results of his defeat? Without a doubt. Now he actively uses the network to cover his routes. This is no longer a point, but a mass. First of all, it is about the hot Pokrovsk direction. Although the videos from Kherson and Sumy areas are familiar and transferred. The first in the history of the war, they came up with the use of a fisherman's network. Ours, military Gorditsin, I heard about this way for the first time in the Armagh direction. Many kilometers of life corridor covered the road in Bakhmut, and on the way to it, they saved hundreds of thousands of lives. Of course, seeing the effectiveness of this method, the Ukrainian army exhibited. Recently, I saw a method of their engineering troops, released in May. There it is writ everything from Medes to Type SVI, which are used for installation. The construction is shared by types for relative safe areas on a distance of more than 20 kilometers from the front and closer. All elements are factory, which increases the speed of installation. The number of personnel is expected. Systems and the state's participation are visible. The Russian engineer published a photo of their construction from the ground. How does it work in practice? The scouts tell. The first day he records the length of the tunnel 1160 meters. After 2 days he is already 1650, that is, the increase is by 1/3. Net, of course, is not covered by drones. FPV operators look for an entrance to it instead of breaking through with shells and then set an ambush, putting the drones in standby mode. When transport is passed, the drone flies down and strikes the target. It is not so easy to break out of the network with the driver in this case. He is in the trap. But still, in such a corridor, logistics losses are significantly decreased. You cannot hit undiscovered transport from flight, and if the tunnel of life were not effective, they would not be used first by us, and then by Ukrainian armed forces. But at the moment, the difference is in the fact that we are doing everything on our own again, and on local initiative, complains Zetnik, and from the text of the material, materials that the military will get. Naturally, this slowdowns the time of installation and security of the structures themselves. Ukrainian armed forces obviously have switched to systematic work. It is seen even by the methodical work, and everything is clipped to production. Therefore, I expect that the network will soon completely cover the front roads of Ukrainian armed forces, especially if Ukraine drinks the necessary ceasefire on negotiations. The enemy will inevitably take advantage of this time, including to equipment the front roads. No matter whether we'll have corridor of life laid out for us, I very much hope end of Shilov. And I'll note that a mirror situation is taking place here, the one on which Ukrainian military and technical specialist Sergei Flash by Skresnov regularly complains. Russians take one or another Ukrainian technical decision and then faster scale it. Here, on the contrary, Ukraine has taken a Russian decision on arms, effectively using it, which is now especially relevant with the intensification and professionalization of the work of Russian elite unmanned units, which analysts regularly talk about. Another Russian innovation that Ukraine would not mind taking UAVs with artificial intelligence. Sergei Flash by Skresnov talks about their development. The Strike UAV with artificial intelligence V2U received a new modification, he writes, and reconnaissance drone with II. This week, such vehicles were noticed on all fronts. In contrast to the Strike version, the Scouts have no rear stabilizers in the center. After the mission is complete, the reconnaissance drone is landing on a parachute. When studying the trophies, it was found that in the V2U program, different options for this line are marked. There are already strike and reconnaissance options, and the Kuryersky drone for logistics remains. The developer and manufacturer are unknown. There are no Russian kits inside the vehicles. The most important question is the interaction of reconnaissance and strike drones within the framework of combat decisions, he emphasizes. I will note again that they are considered a UAV line based on one of the most innovative and dangerous developments, Flash concludes. About another Russian practice that would not interfere with taking to arms, the familiarization of satellite communication systems. The Ukrainian military author of the Telegram channel Officer tells about alternatives to Starlink. Here's what he writes. Russian armed forces are slowly trying to set their own analogies of Starlink, in particular, in the Sumy direction. Recently, my comrades hit such a station of satellite communication which looks like the two-way station. Yes, the system is not ideal at all. It has many downsides compared to the same Starlink. One of them is the need to put a terminal in open area. You will not put it in the settlement. However, the very fact that the Russians are trying to work with other satellite means and internet, although they have been working without Starlink for quite a while, means that they are really moving in this direction. Our whole thing has been built on Starlink from the very beginning. We have a masked man who went off with a carton who danced to Trump's tune, but still we continue to lay all the eggs in one basket, which at one moment can break through. So do 99% of the Ukrainian Defense Forces units. Almost no one has had time to work with other means, except for in the course of the operation when the conditions are forced to this, and in the end, the officer concludes, and it is difficult to agree with him. The Russian army has demonstrated other innovations that I hope Ukraine will never accept in the field of discipline. Yuri Butasov shared a video where two Russian soldiers in one pair are wound up with tape to the tree. They are periodically beat. At one point, Russian soldiers from the 1444th Motorized Rifle Regiment suddenly refused to go to the meat assault, writes Butasov. It is interesting that officially both were on vacation at the moment of the order to storm. In the regiment's chat, this video was fortified with the subscription All 500s, that is, from the Cossacks now is a new rest base during the vacation. This, by the way, confirms what I regularly say. Such videos do not just leak from the network, they are more or less openly published by the fighters themselves, so that other Russian soldiers were not able to refuse to participate in combat actions or leave for Sochi. This is waiting for absolutely everyone who goes to serve on contract. In fact, the Russian commanders themselves and their confiscators are openly warned about this. I warn you and I about this. Telling you about the last exchange of prisoners between Ukraine and the Russian armed forces, I mentioned that the Ukrainian civilian troops were on the list, which Russia and its proxies held since the time of the full-scale invasion. I can't help but bring the story of one of them here for understanding what Russian occupation is. Ogden Kovalchuk, who was held captive for more than 9 years, returned home, said the head of the President's Office of Ukraine, Andrew Yermak, reports Astra. According to Grandma Kovalchuk, they have already been able to talk over the phone. She plans to go to Kiev to meet her grandson. Bogdan called her on the first chance, said, "Grandma, I'm going home." Kovalchuk was detained in 2016 at the age of 17 from the Vysenovity, which is under the control of the Russian occupation forces. He went to Torets to complete training and get a diploma, but soldiers detained him at the block post. Bogdan was accused of cooperation in the security service of Ukraine, as well as of the involvement in the explosion of cars and buildings by the occupation police, created by the structures of the so-called DPR. In 2018, he was fined for 10 years for depriving him of freedom and sent to the colony. Ukraine achieved the liberation of Kovalchuk as a civil prisoner. On August 14, he was exchanged among more than 80 citizens of Ukraine, returned home as part of the new exchange with Russia. According to Ukrainian authorities, on August 14, 84 people were returned from captivity. The special thing about this exchange is that more than 50 civil prisoners were released, many of which held out from 2014 to 2017. Grandfather Zadov from Ivanovo, a year after his wound, restored and received a red print from the writing, but in Donetsk he was accused of buying a military medical commission and was sent to the front. 34-year-old resident of Ivanovo, Konstantin Zadov, in the summer of 2023, went to volunteer service in the war in Ukraine. He served in the military unit 42038, and in October he was wounded, said his wife Olsia in Austria. The man was restored after about a year of multiple shrapnel wounds all over his body. He has now partially lost vision and has artificial crystals. Moscow. Zadov held a military medical commission approved by the Central Military Medical Commission under the category V, limited to Godin, but with a red print, meaning soldiers have a condition unacceptable even under the V category. During the treatment, the man was advised to go to Unit 75384, but it turned out he was announced in Sochi, meaning the unit he had left unauthorized. Zadov returned to Donetsk to report his arrest by the Military Medical Commission, but they refused to take documents from Moscow, sending people to buy false charges. July, Zadov again passed the Military Medical Commission, where they issued the same category but with a blue print and were sent to the front the next day. He was to arrive in the village of Mayak in Malinovka. They are going by raids, they're constantly shelling them. He called twice, reached the base where our birdies from Starlink are located. Well, he connected and wrote that he was live. On August 15, they move further. The next session of communication will be if he finds someone, said the wife of Zadov. At the same time, the man raised an 8-year-old son from the first wedding. Now the child lives with his grandmother and grandfather. I have no great sympathy for people who signed a Russian army contract, but this is another warning for those who think about it. This is how it all ends, or rather, it will end when his corpse will lie in the fields, but no one will let you go in this war. The Russian army has continued to replenish absolutely any contingent. In the Penza region, a man with psychological disability was forced to sign a contract with the Ministry of Defense. This was reported by the Penza rescuers, who managed to communicate with the man. In other words, the man lives alone and has no close relatives. He is illiterate, suffers from alcoholism, and hard to say. She said that unknown people came to the man and forced him to sign a contract, after which he was sent to the passage of the Military Medical Commission, to the benefits of which the man was recognized as valuable to the service. The woman notes that during the passage of the Military Medical Commission, a psychologist was not present at the scene, but despite this, the sign from him was as a result of the investigation. Is the contract voluntary or not, she writes. What if a person is living in the Penza deep, illiterate, old age, drinking? Everyone considered him always a person with flexibilities. He has no close relatives. 2 sisters and a nephew look after him as much as possible, but he lives alone. At some point, important people come after him. They take him from home. What was next? History is still silent, but the future soldier is already preparing to be sent to the special military operation. Barely speaking, shaking, illiterate, perhaps not even idea capable. Why is it possible? Because the psychiatrician, without leaving the vacation, recognized the person as good, healthy. Will the commander, who will have all the dignity of a soldier, writes on his page, a woman, say thank you for such replenishment? In the Udmurt, they stopped criminal cases in the attitude of 2 residents of the Sumy region, which the investigation accuses of theft and the kill of the settlement. According to the report of the Regional Department of the Investigation Com, both figures were sent to the war in Ukraine. As a result of the case materials, on the night of May 4 to 5, the accused people, drunk, began a conflict with a 29-year-old local resident near one of the stores. During the conflict, they put a car in the trunk of the caravan and took it out of the village, where it was shot down. The victim died of injury. The body of the deceased, as the investigation says, the participants of the crime were buried in the forest. The actions of 2 figures were calibrated according to Part 4 of Article 111 of the Russian Armed Forces, the deliberate reason for the heavy harm to the health of the dead, Part 2 of Article 126 of the Russian Armed Forces, the capture of a person. The criminal case in the attitude of the 3rd suspect, which incriminates only the capture, is allocated to a separate production and sent to court. That is, another elite of Russia is going to war instead of going to prison for crimes. Well, Michael Nacke was with you, and see you soon. All the best, bye.